Sometimes the smallest crime is just a child's way of begging the world to notice her pain. If stories of hope, redemption, and second chances touch your heart, please subscribe and stay with us until the very last chapter of this journey. Baltimore rain had a way of washing color out of everything. The streets around Mount Vernon looked like they had been painted in gray. Wet cobblestones, dark umbrellas, and the blurred halo of streetlights reflecting on puddles. At the corner of a small pharmacy, a little girl stood trembling, her brown hair plastered against her forehead, her thin cardigan soaked through. In her tiny hands, she clutched a small white box, Advil, and a bottle of vitamin D. "Please, sir," she whispered to the pharmacist who had caught her. "I swear I won't do it again. My mom's in pain." "She can't move." Her voice cracked somewhere between fear and desperation. She couldn't have been more than 7. Behind her, the doorbell chimed again as a tall man entered, black umbrella, gray overcoat, and a presence that made everyone fall silent for no reason they could explain. Daniel Reed, 36, CEO of Reed Biotech, a pharmaceutical empire known for its clinical brilliance and emotional coldness. He was supposed to be invisible in this moment, just another customer stopping for his medication after a board meeting. But the sight of the little girl froze him in place. "Put that back," the pharmacist said sharply, reaching over the counter. "You can't just steal medicine." The girl's lower lip trembled. "Please, she's sick. I only wanted to help my mom." Daniel's eyes caught the faintest flicker in the girl's gaze, something pure, terrified, and familiar. His pulse stumbled. 7 years ago, he had seen that same look in another pair of eyes, his daughter's, just moments before the car crash that took her life. The world around him seemed to dim. "How much for the medicine?" he asked quietly. The pharmacist blinked. "Excuse me?" Daniel stepped forward, placing his sleek black credit card on the counter. "My daughter forgot to pay," he said, his tone firm and steady, though his chest ached as he spoke. "Please ring it up." The man hesitated, looking from Daniel to the drenched little girl. "Sir, Now." There was authority in that single word, the kind that made people obey. The pharmacist rang the purchase, bagged the medicine, and watched as Daniel turned toward the child. She looked up at him, confused. "You're not my dad." He crouched to her level, raindrops still glistening on his coat. "Maybe not," he said softly, "but someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. Consider this my turn." The girl's lips parted as if to thank him, but instead she burst into tears, tears of exhaustion, hunger, and relief. He gently took the small bag from the counter, handed it to her, and asked, "Where do you live, sweetheart?" "Highlandtown," she said between sobs. "It's far." "I'll drive you." The pharmacist frowned. "Sir, are you sure? It's pouring out there." "I'm sure," Daniel replied. They walked out into the storm together. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement as he held his umbrella over her small frame. In the dim streetlight, he could see her shivering hands clutching the bag like treasure. Inside his car, the heat slowly filled the silence. She sat quietly, staring at the raindrops racing down the window. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Carter." He nodded. "I'm Daniel." The name meant nothing to her, which was oddly comforting. For the first time in years, he wasn't Mr. Reed, the CEO. He was just a man giving a ride to a child who reminded him of everything he had lost. They drove through narrow streets, past old brick buildings and corner diners still glowing through the rain. Finally, Sophie pointed toward a narrow alley with peeling paint and flickering lights. "There, the blue door," Daniel parked and followed her up a flight of cracked steps to a small apartment. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp plaster and antiseptic. On a worn couch lay a woman in her early 30s, pale and trembling, her skin marked by a faint butterfly rash. "Mom!" Sophie cried, rushing forward. "I got the medicine!" The woman's eyes fluttered open. She tried to sit up but winced in pain. "Sophie! How did you—" Daniel stepped closer, removing his coat. "Your daughter was trying to help," he said gently. The woman froze, her expression tightening. "Who are you?" "I'm just someone who saw her in trouble." But as he looked at her face, something shifted inside him. That voice, that face, it couldn't be. "Claire," he whispered. Her eyes widened, then hardened. "Daniel Reed." The name hit the air like static. In that instant, the rain outside seemed to hush. Time folded backwards 7 years, to the corridors of Harvard Medical School, to late nights spent arguing over research ethics, to a breakup that left both scarred in different ways. Claire Morgan, once the brightest resident at Johns Hopkins, now lay before him, stricken by the very disease she had dedicated her life to studying. Sophie looked between them, sensing something she couldn't name. Daniel swallowed, his voice low. "You're sick." Her laugh was dry and brittle. "That's one way to put it. Systemic lupus. It's poetic, isn't it? The doctor becomes the patient." He hesitated. "You should be at Johns Hopkins, under care." "I was," she said, closing her eyes. "Then your company raised the price of immunotherapy. I couldn't afford the follow-ups." The words struck like lightning. His throat tightened. He had signed that approval himself, believing it was just business. "You already walked away once, Daniel," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "Don't play hero now." He opened his mouth but said nothing. Rain tapped against the window like a clock counting down. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't know." She turned her face toward the wall. "Now you do." Sophie gently placed the box of Advil on the nightstand. "It's okay, Mommy," she said softly. "The nice man bought it." Claire said nothing, but Daniel saw the faintest tremor in her lips, half gratitude, half pride. He looked at Sophie again, her brown eyes wide, her little hands resting on her mother's arm, and something deep in him broke open. That night, as he stood at the doorway watching them, he felt a strange warmth amid the storm, a feeling he thought had died long ago. When he finally stepped out into the rain, the city no longer looked gray. Somewhere between guilt and grace, a forgotten part of him began to breathe again. And though he didn't know it yet, the girl who had stolen a box of painkillers had just begun to heal something far greater than pain. The following morning, the city awoke beneath a silver fog. Baltimore's streets steamed faintly where the night rain had met the dawn, and Daniel Reed found himself standing outside the same pharmacy where everything had begun. The scent of wet pavement still clung to his clothes, the image of that trembling child replaying in his mind like a stubborn heartbeat. He hadn't planned to return. CEOs didn't deliver medicine door to door. Yet something about the way Sophie had clutched that bag, her tiny fingers tight with purpose, had unsettled him. It wasn't pity that moved him. It was recognition. He'd once seen the same determination in his daughter's face when she insisted on fixing Daddy's headache with a toy stethoscope. Now, 7 years later, another small girl was trying to heal a world too big for her hands. He stepped into his car and entered the address he'd memorized from the pharmacy receipt, 324 North Highlandtown Avenue. The GPS voice guided him through narrow blocks lined with old row houses, once colorful, now faded and cracked. Baltimore had a way of remembering better days, Daniel thought, even when its people couldn't afford to. When he reached the building, the paint on the railings had peeled into rust-colored curls. The stairwell smelled of bleach and sorrow. He carried the small bag of medicine upstairs and hesitated outside the door marked 12B. He knocked softly. The door opened just a crack. Sophie peeked out, her hair brushed this time, though her eyes still carried that wary light. "Mr. Daniel?" she whispered. He crouched. "I brought something for your mom." Her face brightened, and she turned to call, "Mom, he's back!" The voice from inside was weaker today. "Sophie, I told you—" Claire appeared at the doorway, pale and wrapped in a threadbare robe. Her skin glowed faintly under the morning light, the kind of porcelain pallor doctors recognized immediately as anemia. Daniel lifted the small bag. "You left this on the counter last night." She stared at him for a long moment, then sighed and opened the door wider. "Come in, if you must." The apartment was small but surprisingly neat. Medical books lined the shelf beside a second-hand microscope, a ghost of the woman she used to be. On the kitchen table lay a stack of unpaid bills, a medical chart, and an old prescription slip yellowed by time. Daniel's gaze caught the familiar blue logo, Johns Hopkins Hospital. His eyes trailed down to the patient's name written in neat cursive, Claire Morgan. Something twisted in his chest. He picked it up carefully, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. "This was yours." "Of course it was mine," she said quietly, taking it back. "Who else do you think taught half the residents to write these damn things?" Daniel tried to smile, but it faded. "You were always the best of us." Claire gave a small, bitter laugh. "And now look at me, an unemployed internist with kidneys on strike. Life has a sense of humor." He studied her face, the faint rash, the stiffness in her fingers. "You need proper care, Claire. You can't keep self-medicating." "I can't afford proper care," she said simply. "Not after your company tripled the cost of Plaquenil. Remember the memo you signed?" "I do." The accusation hit its mark. He remembered the meeting room, the CFO explaining margins, his own nod without hesitation. Numbers on a page, not lives. "I didn't know you—" She cut him off. "You never asked who it would hurt." Silence stretched between them, heavy as the humidity outside. Then Sophie broke it with the innocence only a child could wield. "Mom used to be a doctor," she told him proudly, "but now she teaches me. I can name all the bones in the hand." She held up her tiny palm, counting metacarpal, phalanges. Daniel smiled softly despite the ache in his throat. "You're a smart girl." Sophie grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "Mom says learning keeps her alive." Claire exhaled, the strength returning to her voice just a little. "She's right about that, at least." Daniel's eyes wandered again, to the framed photograph on the wall. It showed a younger Claire in a white coat, laughing beside a man he didn't recognize, holding a hospital banner that read, "Lupus Research Fundraiser 2012. "You still believe in it," he said. "In what?" "Helping people who can't pay." Her jaw tightened. "That's the only part of me your world didn't kill." He wanted to protest, to tell her he'd changed, but the truth was he hadn't, not really. He'd built an empire on efficiency, not empathy. Every report he'd signed, every price he'd raised, had been disguised as market necessity. Now, in this small apartment, the lie stood naked before him. "Claire," he began, voice low, "I want to help you. Let me arrange an appointment at Johns Hopkins. Full diagnostic panel. My personal physician, Elizabeth Parker, owes me a favor." Her expression hardened. "I don't need your favors." "It's not a favor. It's an obligation." She shook her head. "You can't fix 7 years of silence with one hospital visit." His eyes glistened. Then let me try to fix one day. Sophie looked between them, confused by the tension. Mom, please, maybe he can help. Claire closed her eyes. For a moment, she looked like she might say yes, but pride was a stubborn disease too. We'll manage, she said finally, turning away. Daniel's voice softened. I'm not doing this out of guilt. She faced him again, her tone icy. Then why? He hesitated, then said quietly, because I still remember the girl who believed people could be healed. The words landed like a touch she wasn't ready for. Claire turned away, tears she didn't want him to see gathering at the corners of her eyes. I think you should go, she said. He nodded, stepping back toward the door. If you change your mind, Dr. Parker's clinic is still on Orleans Street. I'll tell her to expect your call. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small white envelope on the table beside the untouched coffee mug. Just in case, he murmured. She didn't look at it. When he stepped outside, the air felt heavier than before. Rain began to fall again, yet thin and steady, like the city was refusing to let him forget. He stood under the awning, watching droplets slide off the rusted gutters. Behind him, through the thin apartment wall, he could hear Sophie's small voice. Mom, why are you crying? And Claire's whisper, breaking. Because the past doesn't knock twice unless it still wants something. Daniel turned toward his car, heart pounding. He didn't yet understand what destiny was unfolding, but the name on that prescription, written in ink 7 years old, had just rewritten the course of his life. For the first time in years, Daniel Reed didn't go to the office. His assistant flooded his phone with calls about a pending acquisition, but he silenced it. The only thing echoing in his mind was Claire's voice from the night before, sharp, steady, unforgiving. You can't fix 7 years of silence with one hospital visit. He drove aimlessly through Baltimore, passing the familiar skyline that once represented power and progress. Now it felt like a city built on ghosts, including his own. He finally pulled into the underground garage of Reed Biotech headquarters, a gleaming glass tower overlooking the inner harbor. As he stepped into the executive elevator, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. The man staring back wore a $1,000 suit, but his eyes looked hollow. Power without peace had carved something empty inside him. When he reached the 47th floor, his secretary looked startled. Mr. Reed, we weren't expecting you. The board meeting... Cancel it, he said. Sir? I said cancel it. He entered his office and closed the door. Silence. Only the hum of the city below. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and searched the internal company database. Keyword, lupus, drug cost adjustment policy, 2018. The screen filled with memos, ones he had approved, cost optimization plans, reduced subsidies, cutbacks in patient assistance programs, all signed with his initials, DR. He clicked open one. Projected savings, $42 million annually. Expected increase in market efficiency, 18%. Estimated patient impact, minimal. Minimal, he whispered bitterly. Tell that to her. He leaned back, pressing his fingers against his temples. Memory came flooding back. 7 years earlier, the night Claire had stormed into his office in Cambridge, white coat still on, eyes blazing. Daniel, you can't do this, she had shouted, slamming a report onto his desk. You're cutting off a lifeline for people who can't afford the new immunotherapy regimen. It's not my decision alone, he had replied coldly. We have shareholders to answer to. The old formulation is inefficient and unprofitable. Unprofitable? She repeated, voice trembling. We're doctors. We swore to save lives, not balance ledgers. I'm not a doctor anymore, he'd said. I'm a CEO. The silence that followed had been colder than the December snow outside.
"I don't even recognize you," she'd whispered. "You used to believe medicine was mercy."
And you, he'd replied, used to understand reality. That was the night she walked away, and he let her. Weeks later, she disappeared from his life entirely. He heard rumors, her research project defunded, her health failing, her residency quietly terminated. He never followed up. It was easier not to know, until last night. Daniel closed the laptop and stood by the window, watching the ships drift along the harbor. His reflection in the glass looked smaller now, almost human. He took out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Dr. Elizabeth Parker," came a brisk, professional voice. "Liz, it's Daniel." "Daniel?" A pause. "My God. I thought you'd forgotten how to dial without an assistant." "I need a favor." Another pause. "The last time you said that, you asked me to clear a patent lawsuit." "This is different. It's personal." Her tone softened. "Tell me." "There's a patient, Claire Morgan. She's got advanced systemic lupus, needs full workup and treatment. I'll cover everything." He heard Liz's breath catch. "Claire Morgan? The same Claire who—" "Yes." A longer pause. "You really do like impossible cases." "I owe her a life," he said quietly. "Maybe more than one." That evening, Daniel drove back to Highlandtown. The air smelled of rain and diesel, the narrow alleys shimmering under the amber streetlights. When he knocked on the door of 12B, Sophie answered again, holding a flashlight. "Mr. Daniel," she said, eyes bright. "Mom's tired today. She took her medicine and fell asleep. Can I see her for a minute?" Sophie hesitated, then nodded and led him inside. Claire lay on the couch, her breathing shallow but steady. A medical journal rested on her lap, open to an article about autoimmune therapies. Even in illness, her mind refused to quit. Daniel knelt beside her. "Claire," he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly. "You came back." "I spoke to Dr. Parker at Johns Hopkins. She'll see you tomorrow." "No cost. I'll handle transport, everything." Claire's lips tightened. "You're relentless." "Because this isn't charity." "Then what is it?" He hesitated, then said softly, "A debt. And it's long overdue." She looked at him, really looked. For the first time since he'd found her. Something flickered in her eyes, something almost like recognition of the man she once loved. "You think saving me will save you," she said. "It won't." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But if I walk away again, I'll never deserve to live with my name on that building." She turned her face toward the ceiling. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "You always did know how to sound noble when you felt guilty." He almost smiled. "I'll take that as permission." Her voice softened. "If I say yes, it's not because I forgive you. I wouldn't expect it. It's because of Sophie," she said. "She believes people can still be good. I'm not ready to teach her otherwise." Daniel nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. Sophie peeked in from the hallway, holding her stuffed rabbit. "Mom? Are you okay?" "I will be," Claire whispered. "Mr. Daniel's going to help." The girl smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir." Daniel's chest tightened again at the word sir. His daughter had used to call him that too, giggling whenever she played pretend meetings at home. He swallowed the memory and forced a calm tone. "You're welcome, Sophie, and I'll make sure your mom gets better." "Promise?" she asked. "Promise." Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, as if the city itself acknowledged the vow. The next day, Claire was admitted to Johns Hopkins Hospital. Dr. Parker met them at the entrance, a tall woman with warm eyes and sharp intuition.
"She's lucky you found her when you did," Liz said quietly as they watched nurses wheel Claire toward triage. "Her ESR and CRP levels are through the roof. Severe inflammation. She'll need immunosuppressants and probably a steroid taper."
Daniel nodded, his throat tight. Liz glanced at him.
"You look like a man carrying 7 years of guilt."
"I am," he said. "And for once, I'm not trying to drop it." Liz gave a faint smile. "Then maybe you're finally becoming the man Claire thought you were." That night, Daniel stood in the hospital corridor outside Claire's room. Through the glass, he saw her asleep under white sheets, Sophie curled in a chair beside her, holding her mother's hand.
The monitor beeped softly, steady, rhythmic, alive. He felt something shift inside him. Not absolution, not yet, but the first fragile thread of hope. For the first time in 7 years, Daniel Reed didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man finally beginning to repay a debt he could never fully settle. Hospitals never really slept. Even at midnight, Johns Hopkins hummed with quiet life. Machines beeping, rubber soles whispering against sterile floors, the smell of antiseptic mingling with coffee from overworked nurses. In room 314, Claire Morgan lay asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. A soft light glowed above the monitor, casting her face in gentle relief. On the chair beside her, little Sophie Carter sat hugging her knees, wide awake. Her mother's IV bag swayed slightly every time the air conditioner clicked on. Each sound, the pulse ox beep, the soft hiss of oxygen, was a reminder that her mother was alive. For now. Daniel stood at the doorway, arms crossed, unwilling to leave yet unsure of what to say. He'd been there for hours, watching Sophie draw pictures in a notebook. One page showed her mom in a white coat. Another showed a stick figure labeled Mr. Daniel, holding an umbrella over both of them. When she noticed him, she smiled faintly. "You're still here? I wanted to make sure your mom was okay." Sophie tilted her head. "You really care, don't you?" Daniel hesitated. "I do." She looked down at her notebook. "Most people stop caring after they say it once." He swallowed. "That's very true." The girl turned back to her sleeping mother, tracing the outline of Claire's hand through the blanket. "Mom used to say pain is like the weather. You can't stop the rain, but you can hold someone's hand while it falls." Daniel's throat tightened. She was right. "She's always right," Sophie whispered, "even when she's wrong." He almost laughed. For someone so young, she spoke like someone twice her age, as if she'd inherited her mother's quiet intelligence, and her courage, too. He knelt beside her chair. "Does your mom know how brave you are?" Sophie shrugged. "She calls me her reason." She paused, then added, "I think you used to be hers." The words hit him harder than she could have known. He didn't reply. Instead, he reached into his coat and took out a small box of crayons and a puzzle book he'd bought downstairs. "Something to keep you company," he said. Her face lit up for the first time that night. "Thank you. You're welcome." As he stood to leave, Sophie's small hand caught his sleeve. "Mr. Daniel?" "Yes?" "If you really can help my mom, please do it. She's pretending to be strong, but she cries when she thinks I'm asleep." Daniel froze. "I promise I'll be good," Sophie continued earnestly. "I'll study hard. I'll never steal again. Just, please don't let her hurt anymore." He knelt again, eyes stinging. "You have my word, Sophie. I'll do everything I can." She nodded solemnly, as if sealing a pact. Then carefully, she tore a page from her notebook and folded it in half. "What's that?" he asked. "My letter. For you." He took it, confused. "Can I read it now?" "Later," she said, "when you need to remember." He slipped the folded paper into his jacket pocket without opening it. By dawn, Claire was stable enough to rest without oxygen. Daniel left briefly to attend a board meeting he couldn't avoid. He sat through it physically, but his mind was elsewhere. Back in that room, hearing Sophie's voice echo in his head. Please don't let her hurt anymore. When the meeting ended, he returned to the hospital. The nurses greeted him with surprised smiles. The once untouchable CEO now known for showing up with coffee for the night shift. But when he reached Claire's room, it was empty. Panic surged through him. "Where is she?" A nurse looked up from the chart. Dr. Morgan signed herself out against medical advice this morning. Daniel's jaw clenched. She what? She said she didn't want charity. He turned and strode down the hall, frustration burning through him. Outside the hospital, the city was waking to a gray drizzle. He scanned the parking lot, then the bus stop across the street. No sign of her. Back at the car, something white fluttered under the windshield wiper. A small envelope. His name written in a child's looping scrawl. He tore it open. Inside was a crumpled piece of notebook paper. Dear Mr. Daniel, Mom says we can't stay. She doesn't want help, but I know she needs it. If you really want to help her, please do it anyway. Don't listen to her brave voice. It's just her scared one in disguise. Love, Sophie. Beneath the words was a small drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. For a long moment, Daniel stood motionless in the rain. Then he leaned against the car, his hand trembling as he held the paper. Something wet hit the page. Not rain this time. He hadn't cried in 7 years. Later that afternoon, he returned to his office and called Dr. Parker. Claire left the hospital. Can you run her blood work again from last night? Already done, Elizabeth said. Her labs were abnormal, but there's something else. What do you mean? The child. Sophie. She was in the system, too. She had a minor blood test for her mom's insurance record. Her type's O, negative. Daniel froze. Repeat that. O, negative. Pretty rare, actually. His mind went blank. His late daughter, Lily, had been O, negative. So was he. It wasn't proof, not yet, but something deep, instinctive, stirred inside him. Liz, he said slowly, can you send me both reports? Daniel, what are you thinking? He hesitated, voice low. That maybe the past didn't die. Maybe it just found its way back. That night, he couldn't sleep. The rain drummed softly against the window of his penthouse, the city glowing below. He sat in his study, staring at Sophie's letter pinned above his desk. A part of him wanted to believe the blood type meant nothing, coincidence, not connection. But another part, quieter and older, whispered otherwise. He opened the drawer, took out a photograph of Lily, her gap-toothed grin, her bright brown eyes, and placed it beside Sophie's drawing. Same innocence, same courage, same warmth. He closed his eyes. Maybe, he thought, the universe wasn't punishing him after all. Maybe it was giving him one more chance to love right. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Baltimore's sky hung low and heavy, a ceiling of slate pressing down on the city. Every drop that fell against the window of Daniel Reed's penthouse felt like a clock ticking louder, a warning he couldn't ignore. He'd sent 3 messages to Claire. No reply. The number she used before the hospital was disconnected. Even Dr. Parker's team had no leads. Claire had vanished, taking Sophie with her. Daniel sat by the window, the crumpled letter from Sophie still in his pocket. He unfolded it again, smoothing the paper with trembling fingers. "Please don't let her hurt any more." Those words refused to leave him. He reached for his phone and called his driver. "Find Dr. Morgan. Start with Highlandtown. Check the free clinics, the pharmacies, anywhere she might go for pain medication. Don't stop until you do." By nightfall, the city had turned silver with rain. The harbor lights shimmered like broken glass on the water when Daniel's phone finally rang. "Sir," the driver's voice said, "we found her." The clinic was barely more than a converted basement near East Lombard Street. Peeling paint, broken neon, a faded sign that read Community Health Outreach. Inside, Daniel's shoes squeaked on the wet floor as he followed the nurse down the hall. The air was heavy with disinfectant and exhaustion. In the corner of a treatment room, Claire lay on a stretcher, pale and unconscious. Her lips were dry, her breathing shallow. Beside her sat Sophie, clutching her mother's hand with both of hers. "Mommy," she whispered, eyes red. "Please wake up. I'll be good. I promise." Daniel's heart cracked open. He crossed the room in 2 strides. "What happened?" The attending nurse looked up, startled. "You her husband?" "No, but I'm responsible." The nurse frowned at him, then back at the chart. "Severe lupus flare. Her kidneys are failing. BP's dropping. We've stabilized her for now, but she needs full ICU support." Daniel turned to Sophie, kneeling so he could meet her eyes. "Hey, sweetheart. You called me?" She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "I didn't know what else to do. Mom fell down and she wouldn't wake up." He brushed a damp curl from her forehead. "You did the right thing. You saved her." Within minutes, paramedics arrived, loading Claire onto a stretcher. The monitor beeped rapidly, a cruel, urgent rhythm. Daniel climbed into the ambulance without hesitation, taking Sophie's trembling hand in his. "Please," Sophie whispered to no one in particular. "Don't let her die." Johns Hopkins Hospital, emergency wing. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss. Fluorescent lights spilled across the wet tiles as the ER team moved in a blur of motion. "BP 70/40! Creatinine through the roof! Renal involvement severe! Prep high-dose methylprednisolone!" Daniel stood frozen at the edge of the chaos, Sophie clutching his coat, her small body shaking. He heard the doctor shout, "She's crashing! Push epi now!" A flat tone pierced the room. For one terrifying moment, everything stilled. Daniel's mind flashed. Not here, not again. He had already buried one child, lost one woman to ambition and arrogance. Not this time. Then came the faintest beep. Another, and another. Her heart rhythm steadied. The nurse exhaled. "She's back." Daniel's knees went weak with relief. He reached for Sophie, who had buried her face against his shoulder, sobbing quietly. "She's alive," he whispered, holding her tighter. "She's alive, baby girl." Hours passed. Claire was transferred to a private ICU room. Her face was pale against the sheets, but her vitals held. Daniel sat by her bedside, his suit soaked through, his hand resting gently near hers without touching. Sophie slept curled up in the visitor's chair, clutching a hospital blanket and her mother's rosary. Dr. Parker entered quietly, reviewing the chart. "She'll make it through the night," she said. "But Daniel, her kidneys are in stage 4 failure. She'll need long-term therapy, maybe dialysis, possibly a transplant." He nodded, voice low. "Whatever she needs. Money, specialists, anything. Just save her." Liz gave him a long look. "You can't save everyone with money." "I can try," he said. Her expression softened. Sometimes love works faster than medicine. He said nothing. When she left, Daniel leaned forward, whispering near Claire's ear. You're not allowed to give up, do you hear me? I've spent 7 years building walls so I'd never have to feel this again, but I can't lose you. Not again. The machines answered him in soft, mechanical heartbeats. He looked at Sophie, asleep in the chair. Her small hand hung limp over the side, reaching toward her mother's arm. He gently covered both their hands with his. I'll protect you both, he murmured. Even if you hate me for it. At dawn, Claire's eyes fluttered open. She saw Daniel slumped in the chair beside her, his face drawn from sleeplessness, his tie loosened, his hand still near hers. For a moment, she just watched him. The man she once loved had changed, softer now, quieter, stripped of armor. Daniel, she whispered, her voice hoarse. His eyes opened instantly. You're awake. She tried to sit up, wincing. How bad is it? You're stable. They've got you on steroids and IV fluids. She sighed. You should have let me go home. He leaned forward. Home isn't safe anymore. You need long-term care. She stared at him. And you think you can just buy that? I'm not buying anything. His voice cracked. I'm paying what I owe. Her expression softened just slightly. You really haven't changed, have you? I have, he said. You're the only one who'll ever know how much. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he reached out, carefully taking her hand. I'm not saving you out of guilt, Claire, he said quietly. I'm saving you because I still love you. Her eyes filled, but she looked away. Love doesn't fix kidneys. No, he said, but maybe it fixes people. Outside, dawn broke over Baltimore, pale gold spreading across the hospital glass. Sophie stirred awake and climbed into the bed beside her mother, curling close. Claire's hand trembled as she stroked her daughter's hair. She looked at Daniel then, really looked, and for the first time, didn't ask him to leave. He stayed. And as the morning sun filled the room, Daniel realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't running from the past. He was fighting for a future. The days that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm of medicine, murmured prayers, and the steady hum of hospital machinery. The first crisis had passed. Claire's body was fragile, but her spirit, stubborn and luminous, refused to yield. Every morning, Daniel brought coffee for the nurses, flowers for Claire, and storybooks for Sophie. The staff had begun to whisper about the tall man in the suit who never leaves. But Daniel didn't care what they thought. For once, he wasn't the CEO of Reed Biotech. He was simply a man learning how to stay. That afternoon, sunlight poured through the blinds in soft gold stripes. Sophie sat cross-legged on the bed, reading aloud from Charlotte's Web. You have been my friend, said Charlotte. That in itself is a tremendous thing. Her small voice filled the room, trembling just a little. Claire, propped against the pillows, smiled weakly. You read beautifully. Sophie grinned. Mr. Daniel says stories can make people better. Claire turned to him, one eyebrow raised. Does Mr. Daniel also prescribe fairy tales now? Daniel chuckled, setting down a cup of tea. Only for the brave ones. For a moment, the room held something fragile but pure. A silence that wasn't emptiness, but peace. Later, when Sophie left with a nurse to attend a playroom art session, Claire looked at Daniel. You're really here every day. He shrugged lightly. Where else would I be? At your company, fixing your next empire. I've done enough fixing for one lifetime, he said quietly. Maybe it's time to heal instead. Her expression softened, but her tone stayed cautious. You're not responsible for me, Daniel. He met her eyes. Maybe not. But I'm responsible for what my choices did to you. Guilt is easy, she said. Love is harder. I know, he murmured. That's why I'm still here. She looked away. Out the window where sunlight glimmered on the hospital's mirrored wing. You used to believe in healing people, she said. Then you turned healing into a business. He didn't argue. I thought saving lives meant scaling systems. But I forgot the faces behind the numbers. Until you saw mine again. Until I saw hers, he said softly, glancing toward the door where Sophie's laughter echoed faintly. Claire followed his gaze. Her voice wavered. She doesn't need more heartbreak, Daniel. She needs both of you alive, he said. And maybe I do too. Over the next few weeks, Claire's recovery continued slowly. The steroids reduced her inflammation. The new immunotherapy regimen showed promise, and the dark circles under her eyes began to fade. But something else was changing too. Daniel. The man who once measured his worth in quarterly profits now spent his evenings learning how to fold paper cranes with Sophie. He sat through every lab meeting with Dr. Parker, absorbing every word about immunomodulation, plaquenil adjustments, and renal support protocols. When Parker asked why he was suddenly so invested, he answered, "Because I can't build another drug until I understand what it means to save someone." One afternoon, Claire found him sitting by the window in the hospital library, papers spread across the table. "Those aren't corporate files," she said, surprised. He looked up and smiled. "No, they're medical grants. I'm redirecting Reed Biotech's research division." She blinked. "Into what?" "Lupus therapy, affordable access, a non-profit subsidiary." She laughed, shaking her head. "Daniel Reed, philanthropist? You must be ill too." "Maybe I finally caught something worth keeping," he said gently. Her laughter faded, replaced by something quieter, deeper. "Why now?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because once, a woman I loved tried to save people I chose to ignore. And now I see she was right." Claire looked away, blinking back tears. "You can't rewrite history." "No," he said, "but I can write what comes next." That evening, the three of them shared dinner in the hospital cafeteria. Plastic trays, paper cups, and laughter that echoed louder than any fine restaurant. Sophie told stories about her imaginary medical clinic for poor kids and sad grown-ups. "I'll give free medicine," she said proudly, "and hugs are part of the treatment." Daniel chuckled. "Sounds like a solid business model." Claire smiled, her hand resting over Sophie's. "You see what you started?" "Maybe what you both started," he replied. As they laughed, he caught a glimpse of something he hadn't seen in years, hope, alive and breathing, sitting right across from him. Later that night, Claire asked for a short walk outside the ward. The doctors had cleared her for a few minutes of fresh air. Daniel accompanied her through the garden courtyard, where the city's evening glow reflected off wet pavement. She stopped near a blooming magnolia tree, leaning lightly on her cane. "You know," she said, "I used to dream of opening a clinic, free treatment for women with lupus who can't afford insurance. I wanted to call it the Light Room, because even when the body fails, light should stay." Daniel's voice was quiet. "Why didn't you?" Her lips curved sadly. "Because life happened. Because people like you made it impossible." He exhaled. "Then let me make it possible now." Claire turned to him. Why would you do that? Because I remember you, he said. Before the pain, before the fight. You taught me that love without service is vanity. She blinked, her breath catching. And now? Now, he said, taking a small step closer, I want to serve something better than myself. They stood in silence, the magnolia petals falling like slow snow around them. For the first time, Claire didn't look away. Her hand trembled, reaching slightly toward his before stopping halfway. Daniel, she whispered, if I let you back in, it can't be like before. He smiled softly. It won't be. Because this time, I know what love costs. The wind shifted, cool and gentle. Somewhere above, the night sky broke open, a faint patch of stars fighting through the Baltimore haze. Daniel took her hand, not tightly, but carefully, as if holding a fragile miracle he didn't deserve, but had been given anyway. And for that brief, luminous moment, both of them understood. Redemption didn't come from grand gestures. It came from the quiet act of showing up, day after day, with love that finally remembered how to stay. Hospitals have a strange way of slowing time. The days turned into soft repetitions, morning checkups, afternoon readings, quiet evenings when laughter replaced the sound of monitors. Claire Morgan's color had returned, her hair brushed neatly, her steps surer. Sophie had turned the sterile hospital room into a world of crayons, paper cranes, and taped-up stars on the wall. To anyone passing by, it looked like a family. But to Daniel Reed, it felt like standing on the edge of a truth he wasn't ready to face. It began with a single envelope. On a Friday morning, Dr. Elizabeth Parker stopped by his office at Reed Biotech. She looked hesitant, unusual for a woman who'd performed hundreds of surgeries and chaired entire research committees. Daniel, she said, closing the door, you asked me to run that confidential test. He nodded, trying to look calm, though his pulse spiked. And? She placed a small manila folder on his desk. The DNA results came back. Daniel stared at the folder. For a moment, he couldn't bring himself to touch it. Elizabeth studied him. Are you sure you want to know? I've already known for weeks, he murmured. I just need the science to catch up. She sighed. You always were the kind who preferred data to instinct, but sometimes the heart gets there first. He opened the folder. One glance at the report was enough. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. For a moment, the room spun. His hand trembled against the edge of the desk. Sophie Carter wasn't just a stranger's child. She was his daughter, his flesh, his blood, his second chance. Elizabeth's voice broke through the silence. Daniel, are you all right? He nodded, barely. I don't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. Maybe both, she said softly. Claire doesn't know? He shook his head. Not yet. She doesn't even know that I ran the test. Then be careful, Elizabeth warned. Truth can heal, but it can also break what's finally healing. That evening, Daniel walked the long corridor toward Claire's room. His footsteps echoed faintly, his heart racing in sync with each one. When he reached the door, he paused. Through the window, he saw Sophie helping her mother fold laundry, patient gown sleeves, soft towels, laughter. The sight undid him. He leaned against the frame, invisible, listening. Mom, Sophie said, when I grow up I want to be a doctor like you, but I'll give medicine away for free. Claire smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. You'd go broke in a week. Sophie giggled. Then Mr. Daniel can help. He has lots of money. Claire chuckled. Maybe he'd rather help build you a clinic. I'll call it the light room, like you said, Sophie said proudly. Claire paused, her eyes softening. You remember that? Everything, Sophie said. Especially when you smile. Daniel felt his chest tighten so hard it almost hurt. He slipped quietly away, unable to interrupt what already felt sacred. Later that night, after Sophie had fallen asleep in her hospital cot, Claire found Daniel sitting alone in the courtyard garden. The magnolia blossoms had begun to fall, their petals pale against the dark stone. You've been quiet today, she said, sitting beside him. He nodded. Just thinking. About what? He hesitated, glancing at the moonlight reflecting on the fountain. About time. How it keeps moving even when we want it to stop. Claire smiled faintly. I think that's called healing. He studied her face, the softness in her eyes, the faint color returning to her cheeks. Claire, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't fallen apart? She finished. He nodded. Every day, she admitted. But then I look at Sophie and think, maybe everything happened so she could exist. Daniel's breath caught. She's extraordinary, Claire continued. She has your stubbornness, you know. He managed a small laugh. That explains a lot. Claire's gaze lingered on him. You've changed, Daniel. You used to see people as case studies. Now you look at them like stories. Because I finally learned mine wasn't finished, he said softly. She tilted her head. What does that mean? He hesitated. The truth sat heavy in his throat, but fear kept it locked there. Not yet. Not when her peace was still so fragile. Instead, he said, It means I'm grateful for second chances. She nodded slowly. Then maybe we both are. Later that night, while Claire slept, Daniel took out Sophie's old drawing from his wallet, the one with 3 stick figures under the yellow sun. He held it beside the DNA report. It was the strangest kind of proof, one drawn in crayons, the other in science, yet both told the same truth. He traced the letters of Sophie's name, his vision blurring. All those years he'd spent building an empire, chasing precision, controlling everything, and still, life had found a way to surprise him in the simplest, most human form, a child who loved without question. The next morning, Sophie bounded down the hall, clutching a paper crane. Mr. Daniel? She called. He turned, forcing a smile through the ache in his chest. Hey, sunshine, what's that? It's a promise bird, she said proudly. Mom says if you make one for someone, it means you'll never leave. She handed him the tiny crane, her eyes shining. This one's for you. He crouched down, holding it carefully between his fingers. It's beautiful, Sophie. Do you like it? I love it, he said honestly. She grinned. Mom says you're the kindest man she ever hated. Daniel blinked, startled, and then, slowly, he began to laugh. A deep, unguarded, human laugh. Well, he said softly, your mom has always had a way with words. Sophie giggled. She says you make people mad and happy at the same time. He smiled, his throat tight. She's not wrong. As she skipped back toward her room, Daniel looked down at the tiny crane resting in his palm. For years, he'd lived surrounded by numbers, formulas, and profit margins, things that could be calculated. But now he held something immeasurable. Something alive. He whispered to the quiet hallway, Thank you, Sophie, for remembering what love feels like. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a man haunted by loss. He felt like a father, one who'd been found before he even knew he was lost. Autumn came early that year. The trees outside Johns Hopkins Hospital traded their green for deep copper, and the hallways began to hum with the rhythm of new interns and fading daylight. Inside room 314, life had quietly become something beautiful again. Not perfect, but alive. Claire Morgan's cheeks held color now. Sophie had been allowed to go home for weekends. And Daniel Reed. He had started to believe that maybe redemption didn't need to be earned through punishment, but through consistency, through showing up every single day. Yet peace, as always, was fragile. And someone had been watching. It started with a whisper. That morning, Dr. Elizabeth Parker caught Daniel in the hallway. "You've made headlines," she said, holding up her phone. He frowned. Headlines. She read aloud from the article. Reed Biotech CEO seen personally funding treatment for ex-girlfriend. Conflict of interest? Or corporate scandal? Daniel froze. Who leaked that? Elizabeth lowered her voice. Someone inside your own board. I'd bet my license it's Victoria Hale. The name tasted bitter in his mouth. Victoria Hale, Reed Biotech's Senior Vice President of Investor Relations, brilliant, ruthless, and his former fiancée. A woman who could weaponize rumor faster than most people could breathe. She won't stop until she ruins you, Elizabeth warned. She's already tried, he muttered. This time, I'll make sure she doesn't destroy Claire too. That evening, Daniel arrived at the hospital later than usual. The corridors were quiet, the lights dimmed. As he turned the corner toward Claire's room, he noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, a nurse in blue scrubs stood beside Claire's bed, typing quickly on the computer station. Her back was turned, her badge flipped backward. "Excuse me," Daniel said, stepping inside. "Visiting hours are over. What are you doing?" The nurse didn't answer right away. Then she looked up, too calm. "Just updating the patient chart." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You're not on Dr. Parker's rotation." The woman froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled faintly. "I cover night audit." Something in her tone was wrong. He moved closer, quietly. His instincts honed from years of corporate battles where every silence hid a motive. As he glanced at the screen, he saw what she'd been accessing. Reed Biotech Financial Fund Portal. Not medical charts. "Step away from the computer," he said evenly. She hesitated. "I said now." His voice cut sharper. The nurse turned suddenly, bolting for the door. Daniel lunged, grabbing her arm. Her ID badge snapped free, clattering to the floor, revealing not a hospital insignia, but a private contractor's logo. Security guards appeared seconds later. The woman struggled, shouting, "You think this will stop her? The world will know who you really are?" "Take her to security," Daniel ordered. His voice didn't rise, but it carried a weight that made even the guards hurry. When the hallway emptied, he picked up the fallen badge. Name, Melissa Gray. Employer, Hale Media Consulting. His stomach dropped. Victoria. By the next morning, the story had exploded online. CEO Daniel Reed accused of embezzling corporate research funds for personal relationship. Whistleblower claims hospital cover-up at Johns Hopkins. Social media devoured every rumor, every blurred photograph of him walking beside Claire's wheelchair. At Reed Biotech, the board demanded an emergency meeting. Victoria Hale arrived in flawless white, the color of innocence, her favorite irony. "Daniel," she purred across the table, "you've always been a visionary. But even visionaries can lose perspective when they fall for the wrong woman." He met her gaze coldly. "You had someone hack a patient's chart. That's a federal offense." She smiled, unbothered. "The public doesn't care about HIPAA, darling. They care about scandal. And if the media believes you funneled corporate money to a mistress, your empire collapses before Monday." Daniel's jaw tightened. You're willing to ruin innocent lives just to win a board vote? I'm saving the company from your sentimentality, she said sweetly, and from your past. Don't talk about her. Why not? You used to talk about me, she hissed, until you traded ambition for charity. He stood, his voice low but lethal. You always mistook love for weakness, Victoria. That's why you'll never understand strength. That night he went back to the hospital. Claire was sitting by the window, her IV removed for the first time in weeks. I saw the news, she said quietly, her hands folded in her lap. He exhaled. I was going to tell you before it broke. Everyone's saying you misused company funds. They can say what they want, he replied. I know the truth. Her eyes met his, calm but heavy with hurt. And what's the truth, Daniel? That you helped me out of guilt? Or love? Because the world doesn't care about your reasons. They'll just see me as the woman who cost you everything. You didn't cost me anything, he said, stepping closer. You gave me something I didn't think I deserved. She shook her head. I don't want to be your redemption arc. You're not, he said softly. You're my beginning. Claire turned toward the window. Then start acting like it. Fight for what's right, not just for me. Moments later, a security guard knocked, handing Daniel a sealed folder. We reviewed the CCTV, sir. You were right. The intruder planted falsified documents on the server. Daniel opened it, scanning the evidence. Forged invoices linking Claire's treatment to corporate accounts. Victoria had crossed from manipulation into crime. He looked back at Claire. You said to fight for what's right. I will. Daniel. He took her hand, steady, certain. I'm done apologizing. It's time to tell the truth. Outside the hospital, cameras already lined the street. Reporters shouted questions as Daniel walked past them, flanked by his legal counsel. Mr. Reed, is it true you funded your mistress with company money? Who is Claire Morgan to you? Will you resign from Reed Biotech? He paused on the steps, rain beginning to fall again, cold and deliberate. She's not my mistress, he said clearly, his voice carrying through the crowd. She's the reason I remembered what humanity means in medicine, and if that costs me my title, then so be it. The flash of cameras lit his face like lightning. He didn't flinch. Back inside, in room 314, Sophie watched the live broadcast from her tablet. She turned to her mother, eyes shining. Mom, she whispered. He's not afraid anymore. Claire's lips trembled, pride and fear mixing in equal measure. No, she said softly. He's finally who he was meant to be. It was the kind of morning that made the city hold its breath. The marble steps of the Maryland State Medical Ethics Board were packed with cameras, microphones, and the low static hum of anticipation. Reporters whispered Daniel Reed's name as if it were a headline come to life. The fallen CEO, the scandal, the woman, the cure. Inside, the hearing room smelled faintly of coffee and tension. Rows of reporters filled the benches. Physicians and board members sat under the seal of the state. At the center table sat Daniel Reed, flanked by legal counsel, composed, calm, but every muscle in his body coiled like a wire. Across from him, Victoria Hale adjusted her pearl earrings, her expression serene and sharp. Her attorney leaned in, whispering something that made her smile. And behind them, quietly in the back row, Claire Morgan sat in a wheelchair, wrapped in a soft gray coat. Sophie clutched her hand, her eyes wide but steady. The proceedings began. Mr. Reed, said the chairwoman, Dr. Cynthia Lopez, her voice measured. You stand accused of misusing corporate research funds for personal purposes. specifically the medical treatment of one Dr. Claire Morgan. Do you wish to make an opening statement? Daniel stood. The room fell silent. I do. He took a deep breath, then looked directly at the board. 7 years ago, he began, I approved a cost-cutting policy that tripled the price of lupus medications. It was legal, profitable, and devastating. I told myself it was business, but it was cowardice. He paused, letting the words land. Last month, I found a woman, a doctor, a mother, and once the best person I ever knew, lying on a hospital bed because of the very policies I built. Helping her wasn't misuse of company funds. It was restitution. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria's lawyer rose sharply. So you admit to diverting research funds for personal use? Daniel met his gaze. No, I used my own discretionary CEO budget. Every dollar accounted for. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, audit trails, and donation receipts from Daniel's personal accounts. The lawyer frowned, flipping through the pages. And the forged documents linking hospital invoices to Reed Biotech's ledger? The board chair asked. Daniel nodded toward the projection screen behind him. They were planted. A technician pressed play on a security video. The grainy black and white footage showing the nurse sneaking into Claire's hospital room, copying files, altering invoices. Gasps filled the room. Daniel's voice stayed steady. The intruder worked for Hale Media Consulting, a firm owned by my former vice president, Ms. Victoria Hale. Victoria's attorney shot up. Objection. The chairwoman raised a hand. Overruled. Daniel turned to face Victoria. You wanted control of Reed Biotech, even if it meant destroying the people who reminded me why it existed in the first place. You weaponized compassion because you couldn't feel it. Her face didn't move, but her hands clenched the table edge. He continued, Medicine without humanity isn't innovation. It's cruelty with better branding. The audience, doctors, nurses, journalists, erupted in quiet applause before the chairwoman restored order. Hours passed. Evidence after evidence dismantled the accusation. Emails surfaced showing Victoria's orchestration of the smear campaign. The final blow came when Dr. Elizabeth Parker testified. Mr. Reed didn't fund Dr. Morgan's treatment through corporate accounts, she said firmly. In fact, his intervention has already saved 3 other patients through a new compassionate use program he established, at his own expense. Reporters scribbled furiously. One whispered, This is bigger than a scandal. This is reform. Finally, Dr. Lopez looked up from her notes. Ms. Hale, do you wish to respond? Victoria's voice cracked slightly. You can't prove intent. Daniel leaned forward. No, he said quietly, but we can prove truth. And that's enough. The room went still. At the close of the hearing, the board chair read her verdict. The investigation finds no misuse of corporate funds. Instead, it recognizes that Reed Biotech has taken steps toward ethical reform under Mr. Reed's leadership. Furthermore, the board refers Ms. Victoria Hale to the state attorney for prosecution under HIPAA and corporate fraud statutes. The gavel struck. The hearing was over. For a long moment, Daniel stood motionless, breathing slowly. It was over. The lies, the shame, the ghosts. When he turned, he saw Claire watching him from across the room. Her eyes glistened, not with pity, but pride. Sophie ran down the aisle before anyone could stop her, straight into Daniel's arms. You did it, she whispered, her little voice trembling with joy. He held her close, whispering back, No, sweetheart, we did it. Reporters swarmed the steps as they left the building. Cameras flashed, microphones rose, and one journalist shouted the question everyone wanted answered. "Mr. Reed, what will you do now that your name is cleared?" Daniel paused at the top of the steps, the late afternoon sun spilling across the marble. He looked at Claire, then at Sophie, and smiled. "I'll do what I should have done years ago," he said. "I'll build something that heals more than bodies, something that heals trust." The headline the next morning read, "From Scandal to Salvation, CEO Daniel Reed redefines medicine through humanity." That evening, back at the hospital garden, Claire and Daniel sat together under the magnolia tree. Sophie chased fireflies across the grass. "I heard they reinstated your board seat," Claire said softly. "I told them to keep it," Daniel replied. She turned to him, surprised. "You're leaving your company?" "I'm keeping the mission, not the title," he said. "Reed Biotech will run under the new foundation's ethics charter. No more price gouging. No more faceless spreadsheets." Claire smiled faintly. "And what about you?" "I think I've already found my cure," he said, glancing at her hand resting near his. She followed his gaze and let her fingers brush his, hesitant at first, then steady. "You realize," she murmured, "you're quoting me now." He laughed quietly. "You were always the better teacher." Sophie's laughter rang out as a firefly landed in her palm. "Mom, look, it's light that doesn't burn." Claire smiled through tears. "Yes, darling," she whispered. "That's exactly what it is." Daniel looked at them, mother and daughter, light and reason, and thought that maybe love, when it was honest, didn't blind people at all. It showed them the way forward. A year later, Baltimore was different. Or maybe it was Daniel Reed who was. The sky over Roland Park stretched wide and blue, sunlight pouring through the magnolia trees that had once watched over so much pain. The old hospital garden was now part of something bigger. A new research wing funded by the Sophie Carter Lupus Foundation, built on the same principles that had once saved Claire's life: accessibility, dignity, and light. The grand opening drew doctors, journalists, and families from across the country. But beneath the polished speeches and silver ribbons, what truly filled the air was gratitude. Not corporate, not ceremonial, human. Daniel stood at the podium, his tailored suit softened by a lilac tie Sophie had chosen for him. She stood beside him in a white dress, holding a small bouquet of lilies for her mother. Claire, radiant but still a little fragile, sat in the front row, a gentle breeze teasing strands of hair across her face. "Before we begin," Daniel said, his voice steady, "I want to tell you a story." He paused, scanning the crowd. Doctors in white coats, patients in wheelchairs, young researchers holding notebooks. "It started with a stolen bottle of pain relievers," he continued. "A little girl walked into a pharmacy one rainy night because her mother was sick and couldn't afford the medicine. Most people saw a thief. I saw a reflection." The audience grew quiet. "That girl reminded me of something I had forgotten, that every statistic has a heartbeat. Every cure begins with compassion, and every company, every leader has a choice: profit or people. I chose wrong once. This foundation exists so we never have to make that choice again." Applause rippled through the courtyard, soft at first, then building until it filled the air like sunlight. Daniel smiled, turning to Sophie. "And this," he said, resting a hand on her shoulder, "is the reason it all began. The little girl who refused to give up." Sophie blushed, hiding her face behind the flowers as laughter rippled through the crowd. Claire's eyes shone as she rose to the podium, leaning gently on her cane. "When I was sick," she said, I thought I'd lost everything. My work, my independence, my future. But illness can strip away illusions too. It can show you who stands by you when the world stops believing. She turned to Daniel, her smile trembling but sure. He stood by me. He turned his empire into empathy, and now, together, we stand for every woman who's ever had to choose between her health and her rent. The applause came again, this time thunderous. Later, after the ribbon was cut, reporters crowded around the courtyard fountain, microphones flashing, children laughing. Sophie handed out small paper cranes to patients, hundreds of them, folded over the last few months with Daniel's clumsy but earnest help. Each one carried a tiny printed message. For every pain healed, another heart awakens. A journalist asked Daniel, "Mr. Reed, what does this foundation mean to you personally?" He looked down at Sophie, who was now showing off her cranes to a group of nurses. "It means," he said, "that a mistake doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes it's the first honest page." Claire joined them, slipping her hand into his. "It means light," she said softly. "Light?" the reporter asked. Claire smiled. "The kind that doesn't burn, only guides." That evening, the celebration quieted. The guests left. The garden glowed under strands of soft lights draped along the trees. Daniel, Claire, and Sophie stayed behind, sitting on a bench overlooking the fountain. Sophie yawned, leaning against Daniel's arm. "Can we stay here forever?" He smiled. "I think we already are." Claire looked up at the stars beginning to pierce the twilight. "You know," she said, "I used to think forgiveness was an ending. Something you say once and move on. But it's not. It's daily. Like medicine." Daniel turned to her. "And love?" She smiled faintly. "Same prescription. Different dosage." They both laughed softly. Sophie reached into her small bag and pulled out something wrapped in tissue. The old dented Advil box that had started it all. She handed it to her mother. "I kept it," she said. "So we never forget." Claire's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Daniel. "You kept everything, didn't you?" He nodded. "Every word, every letter, every lesson." She placed the box gently into his hands. "Then let's frame it. For the foundation." He smiled. "Already planned. It'll hang by the entrance, next to the mission statement." "What does it say?" Sophie asked sleepily. Daniel lifted her into his lap and whispered, "For every pain healed, another heart awakens." Claire rested her head on his shoulder, the night settling around them like a promise kept. A year ago, they had been broken. A sick mother, a desperate child, and a man who had forgotten how to love. Now they were a family. Not the kind born from perfection, but the kind built from presence, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. The fountain behind them shimmered in the lamplight. The plaque beneath it read, "The Sophie Carter, Lupus Foundation, founded 2025. Dedicated to all who fight for the right to heal." Above the plaque, inside a glass frame, hung the small battered box of medicine, the very symbol of what love can save. And as the night wind swept gently through the courtyard, Sophie's voice, drowsy but sure, carried softly into the stars. "See, Mom? I told you stories can make people better." Claire smiled, closing her eyes. "You were right, my darling. And this one healed us all." Daniel tightened his arm around them both, looking at the glowing fountain ahead, the light they had built from loss. For the first time in his life, Daniel Reed didn't feel like a man trying to escape his past.
He felt like a man standing in the warmth of everything he'd ever hoped to become. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this healing journey. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion can change a life, please subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Because sometimes a single act of kindness can rewrite an entire story.